Good day. I hope you've had a great day today. And I hope that this message, as all of these messages, will find you encouraged even in tough times, times that are trying all of us. In fact, that's what we're going to be talking about this evening is in Christ and with you, I can find peace in the midst of calamity, in the midst of tough times, trying times. I know you probably think that I have contrived this message for this time, but believe it or not, months ago, when I outlined what our Connect groups would be studying, this was the next one in line. Um, so here we are, and it couldn't be more ironic, providential maybe, but we're going to discuss how you actually find peace in times of trial, calamity, etc. Before we get to that, two things that I want to share with you. One is on behalf of the staff, we sure miss being with you. And I know that you feel the same way, that it's great that we have these virtual worship services, these virtual lessons, and it's marvelous we have that technology, but there is just nothing like being together. And I want you to know that we, the staff at the church, miss being with you weekly. We miss being able to just look each other in the face, to share smiles, to share great memories, and to share great thoughts and just what's going on in our lives. Assemblies are such a great touchstone for our lives. And maybe you, like me, have really felt the absence in your life of just being able to be around dozens and dozens and dozens of people that you love and care about very much. I also want to tell you how much we appreciate you being adaptable and the great spirit with which every one of you has responded to a lot of changes that we've had to make in a very short amount of time. It was 3 Sundays ago that we had to cancel all services but Sunday morning. We all met on Sunday morning, didn't have class, didn't have connect groups, didn't have Wednesday night because of this coronavirus. It was the next week, 2 Sundays ago, that we didn't meet at all and went totally virtual because um, our government was trying to adapt to the challenges as we were learning them about the coronavirus. And then this last Sunday, same thing. And that's a lot of change in just a few days. And everybody's trying to adapt, and we're getting new information every day because this virus, which is called a novel virus, really is novel. And I just want to congratulate you and tell you how much it speaks about you as a person and about this congregation as a collective of people, how well you have responded, the great spirit with which you've responded. And I want you to know that that has been encouraging and uplifting to every one of us. Now, along that line, I want to address something else before we get into our lesson today, and that's the idea of um, governors, president, whoever it is, telling us you can't meet. Now, that kind of rubs us the wrong way. And I know my first response to that was kind of, here we go. And the reason I'm addressing this, if you look historically, there has, throughout history of the church and Christianity, there's been an uneasy relationship between government and the church. Certainly, toward the end of the first century and well into the second century, persecution. Governments were against the church. The church had just a relatively short amount of time of peace, and then it went into persecution. And a lot of that you've heard of Nero and um, Domitian and people like that who took it upon themselves to just make life miserable. And so, in our hearts, we've all learned that history. And in our hearts, when we hear a government imposing itself on us, we get uneasy, and I think rightfully so, because of that relationship. Because I think ideally, from our perspective, Christianity and government go down parallel paths, but they kind of stay out of each other's business. Separation of church and state, which are built into the founding documents that we have. And the idea is um, that each has their realm. The problem is we overlap because all of us are trying to impact human behavior. All of us are trying to impact leadership, if you will, leading folks to certain directions or outcomes. And what that creates is potential conflict. Um, and that conflict is lived out in the Supreme Court stand on abortion, things like that, where Christianity is viewing one way, government's viewing another. Now we find ourselves in conflict with one another, and we get anxious when that conflict begins because we know historically it can end up with persecution. Now, the other side of that is we don't want the government to support Christianity, if you will. Now, it sounds good in one sense, but we've seen the dangers of government backed religion. Church of England, the Lutheran Church in Germany in World War II. And part of the reason that, uh, big reason that that whole Holocaust was able to take place is because the government controlled the religion to a great extent. As much as we don't want to see Nero persecuting the church, we also don't want to see Constantine in the third century trying to make Christianity the religion of the Roman Empire, creating what became known as the Holy Roman Empire. The stories about Constantine would take branches or have his men take branches, dip it in the water, and he would throw those at his troops and call it a baptism. He was trying to proselytize everybody without their will, without their consent. He was trying to, I guess, in his own way, get everybody to heaven by determining it for them. That's the danger of government backing religion or backing any philosophical idea like that. Is they're not the best ones to determine how to do that, and they can tend to do it in a way that is counterproductive. Now, so our government comes along, our governor or our mayors or president or whoever, CDC, and says, we have these recommendations. Because of the contagion that is involved in this pandemic, where we need to restrict people getting together. Now, folks, understand this. Had they singled us out as Christians, had they said, because you're Christians, you can't meet, it's a totally different dog than the one we're talking about. What they did was said, we don't want any associations of people 10 or more, for example. That's across the board. They're not trying to target a group. What they're trying to do is to prevent this contagion. Now, when they do that, we as churches then have the right, the response, whatever. We're going to decide what to do with that. We can either defy that, and when this persecution complex comes up, that's where we're forced into, is we're going to defy our government, or we can go the direction that so many churches and so many denominations have gone, and that is we're going to comply with this because we're going to find another way to do what it is God has commanded us to do without having to run the risk of infecting people or even leading to the demise of people who might have an impaired immune system that we don't know anything about. So we're going to try to find a way to fulfill Romans 13, but also Hebrews chapter 10. We're going to try to find a way to do that. And technology has helped us to be able to do that. I think some other alternatives would be, we might decide, if this thing were to go on, we might decide that we're going to have groups of less than 10 meet in homes. And we could have part of that being maybe a message from Dan, and part of that being someone in the group sharing scriptures, singing together, just house churches like they had in the first century because it was illegal to meet. There's alternatives that we have. What we've decided to do is take advantage of the technology that not only has been made available by science, but what was actually brought into our congregation months and years ago under the vision of our elders to be able to stream our services to people who can't be there. Now, if folks can't be there, are they forsaking the assembly? No. It's for us to stream it to them when we haven't wheeled their hospital bed into the room. Is that wrong? No, absolutely not. The whole idea is we want them to be part of this assembly, even though they can't be here. So what's happened is this situation has expanded the use of that in ways that we hadn't anticipated, but thank God we have. And thank God for the wisdom of the elders to their vision to be able to put us in a position to where we can do what we're doing. But I want you to understand, because a time may come someday when our government, the government of the United States, says you can't meet as Christians. I hope that day never comes, but if you look at the direction that our culture is going, you at least have to entertain the possibility of that. And when they say that, not because of a pandemic, and I mean where they're pointing us out, you guys can't meet, then we're going to have to do what we've always done historically, is no one can stand between us and our God. We're going to do what God has told us to do. Now, we may break into smaller groups because catacombs can only hold so many people, but we're going to find a way to continue to assemble. We may do it as a smaller house church, but we're going to find ways to assemble. And it may be in our building until you come and chain us up and haul us away. We're going to take that stand. Now, I hope you see the difference between a choice that we have made to comply with government while still being able to fulfill the directions of Scripture versus being singled out by our government. You cannot do this because you are Christians, and that's when we would have to defy. By the way, I hope that, and I know that you, like so many of us, because of your faith, you're finding the silver lining in the dark cloud. You're finding the ways that God works all things for good. And one of the things that I think you're experiencing, probably as much as I'm experiencing, is just the loss of being able to be in the same room. However, I don't know about you, but these last couple of weeks of being able to commune with you and doing that through the airwaves, so to speak, it's really brought about. I honestly have shared with you, I've taken for granted us being able to take communion together in the same room. I've taken for granted the men that would get up every week and prepare our minds for partaking of the Lord's Supper, and how great it was. And you know, the old saying, you never know what you have till it's gone. And I miss that, but it's been powerful knowing that across blocks or across miles, people are communing with me and with the Lord together at the same time, with the same heart, same intent. There's power in that too. And that's really been humbling and exciting to me, is to realize, like this last Sunday, when we all stood, you stood in your room, I stood where I was, we were united and we showed that unity to God. And there's a different way, there's a way in doing that with distance that speaks in a way that is different. It's not better or worse, just different than us all being in the same room. So, you know, looking for the good, the silver lining, so to speak, is we see things in from unique perspectives, and if nothing else, we learn to appreciate. And boy, how great it's going to be when we can get back together in that one big room and we can do that together. But I'll tell you this, I'll never take communion the same way. Never. Because I've experienced it from distance and I've experienced it from being together. And it's going to be very, very special to be back together with you, to commune with you, be different, be special, not better, not worse, but I'll never, ever again take it for granted. Have you ever watched a movie more than once? You ever read a book more than once? I have to admit to you, I am not good at doing that. When I see a movie, I'm done with it. Now, there's very few exceptions of that. Um, there are movies that I guess are classics. Our families, my family and Charlotte's family, we have a Christmas tradition of watching the Christmas Vacation, and we all know the lines. And it's you'll find us laughing before a scene even plays out because we know what's coming, etc. And that's kind of a special thing. But Rarely do I do that. Rarely do I read a book the second time. I get out of it what I want to get out of it. And to me, if I know where the plot's going to go and all of those kinds of things, it's just I don't want to do it again. Now, if you're like me, and we tend to be that way as Americans, if you're like me, that's going to present a problem because so many of the most fundamental things that we need to do and believe, etc., comes from memory, comes from review, comes from going over the same information that we've had before. There's two types of culture and how they approach learning and connecting through learning. One is the new, and the other is the reflective. The new is what's next, what's coming, etc. The other is tell me what's happened. It's sharing stories of the past that connects us. We tend to be very Greek in our mindsets. And by that I mean, when Paul was at the Areopagus, Luke brings out that one of the reasons they got together was just to share new things. Let me read the passage from Acts 17, verse 19. And they took him and brought him to the Areopagus, saying, May we know what this new teaching is that you're proclaiming, for you're bringing some strange things to our ears. We want to know, therefore, what these things mean. Now all of the Athenians and strangers visiting there used to spend their time in nothing other than telling or hearing something new. The Areopagus, they loved to hear new things. They didn't do anything with them. They didn't live by them. It was just they loved to be what I call mentally stimulated or mentally massaged. They love to have someone just, massage their brain and just, that's interesting, that's great. And that's what philosophy often tends to do. And they're interested in hearing what Paul says because they've never heard it before. Now, they're going to scoff at it, and they're going to basically put him off. They're going to table it. We'll hear more about this later. Because they weren't interested in obeying it or living by it. They just love things that are new. The other kinds of cultures are those that share stories. They share them over and over and over again. Now, we have a part of that, and I would suggest that in the past, that tended to be more of our culture. We would go to church and we wanted to hear sermons that we had heard before. We wanted to sing songs. Tell me the old story. Tell me the story of Jesus. And it's tell me again, tell me again, tell me again. But in our culture, especially in the last 100 years, we become more and more and more consumers. Consumers eat things and then go to find something else to eat. It's tell me something I don't know. We don't call it the 10 o'clock information. We call it the 10 o'clock news. The thing is, we don't just have it at 10 o'clock. We've got channel after channel after channel. It's devoted to news. It's interesting we call it that, not information. It's what's new in the world. And these channels are on 24/7. So they're constantly seeking the new. And we eat that every day. We feast on that every day. What's new? What's going on? Etc. And you have cultures that would get together, mainly more in the past or more in places that are not Western European, North American, whatever, that they'll share the messages of old. They'll share the mythologies of old or what great characters did. And they'll share them over and over and over, and it unites them because their stories tell who they are. The stories tell their past and tell how the present is connected to the past and all of those kinds of things. Because the United States is a melting pot, people who came here were trying to get rid of their past. So if you get rid of your past, you look forward to what's new. Have you ever looked on Google, up at the right-hand side, on the front page of Google, there is a section that says trending, and it'll list 10 things that are trending. And what that means is, interesting term, trend, but what it is what people are searching for right now. What's interesting about it is you sit there and watch it change. What What's trending this minute in 10 minutes won't even be on the top 10. Something else will have taken its place. And there have been times I've just watched that to see how long something will stay trending before it gets taken away by the next trend. So even how Google measures what people are looking at is based upon trends. What are trends? What's new? Now, the challenge with that is we don't like, it's kind of like my confession. I don't like seeing a movie all over again. I don't like reading a book the second time. I want new entertainment. I want new enjoyment, escapism, whatever. Don't really enjoy reviewing things. I tend to have a very Greek mind. The challenge with that is times of trial and stress and calamity, I need to review what I already know. I need to review what I have been taught because I tend to forget it. Now, when I talk about forgetting, let me describe our memories similar to that of a computer. When you turn a computer on, it has what's called random access memory. Before that, it has ROM memory. ROM memory is permanently written stuff. It tells a computer how to start up, how to connect with the keyboard, how to connect with the monitor. And it's got to do this every time you start it up. And that's read-only memory. That's not addressable. You can't change it. And then the computer begins to load things into its RAM memory. And that's what you and I use, random access. It can access anything all at the same time. That would be like our consciousness. This is what the computer is aware of that it's doing. You can have 2 or 3 programs open, but it's only going to pull one of those programs in at a time so you can interact with it. That's random access memory. Then we have a hard drive, which is secondary memory. When the computer takes things out of RAM, if you write a letter and then you save that letter into a file, and that becomes your secondary memory. You save it on the hard drive, and then you close out, say, Word. The computer forgets. It forgets that it ever wrote that letter. It forgets that it had Word open because it's not in access memory. It's not in RAM memory. So in order to go back and open that letter, you're going to have to tell Windows, all right, open up Word. Now, go find this letter and load that letter, and it loads all that into RAM, and then it remembers it, so to speak. Our RAM is like our consciousness. Our secondary memory is like things that we don't have in our minds right now. We're not thinking of right now, but it's back there somewhere. And if I need to pull it up, I can pull it up. You'll notice this, and it's like it comes from your hard disk up to your conscious mind. It comes from storage, secondary, up to your conscious mind, and you're now aware of it. When you hear a song that you haven't heard in years, you still remember the words. Now, you weren't thinking about the words, but they're brought to your memory. They're brought to your RAM memory, so to speak, and you can sing right along as if it was 15 years ago when you first heard the song or whatever. Our minds kind of work the same way. Now, here's the challenge. When we get into crisis, boy, we tend not to access our secondary memory, our hard drive, and it's all RAM, okay? It's all consciousness. Now, the greater the crisis, the more limited the focus. I don't know if you've ever gone fast in a car or if you've been in a small aircraft or whatever. Have you ever noticed that the faster it goes, the more narrow your peripheral vision becomes? The faster we move, the less we see what's out at the sides, and the more we see what's right in front of us. And that's because that's what we have to react to. What's out here isn't important because this is all coming at us so fast. We have to react to that. Our brains are able to do that. Our vision works that way. And any race car driver will tell you that your peripheral vision becomes very, very focused when you're 2 feet behind the guy in front of you that's going 200 miles an hour. It's the same way in crisis. Our attention becomes very focused. The illustration I introduced in the lesson that you have available to you is, I want you to imagine walking through the woods and coming up on a 10-foot Alaskan brown bear. As soon as you see the bear, your heart rate goes up, adrenaline is dumped in your system, which causes you to be able to respond fast, move fast, think fast. And you've heard people say it seems like everything went into slow motion. And it's not that it goes into slow motion, it's that your brain is going so much faster. Now, the problem with that is we can think fast, but because we can think fast, if we try to hold several different thoughts at the same time, it creates panic. Well, I need to do this. I need to do this. Oh, what's going to happen here? What's going to happen there? When I first see the brown bear, I don't think about, I wonder what my family back at home's doing. I wonder if that check cleared the bank. Did I remember to leave the hamburger meat out to thaw for dinner? See, all of those things are gone. They're not in my RAM memory. It's just straight focus. There's one thing that is my focus, and that's that bear and trying to live. Now, what happens is, I've got to respond, and I'm adrenalized, and I'm anxious, and all of these kinds of things, which are a gift that become a real problem because they can turn into panic. What can happen is, because my brain is working so fast, it can try to outthink itself, so to speak. So what I have to do is take control of my mind with my will and say, all right, stay calm, think, I know what to do. I need to very slowly lay down, get in a fetal position, and be very, very still. Now, when I'm adrenalized and I'm thinking fast, what am I going to do? What can happen is I need to run. I need to climb a tree. The fight or flight thing. And I'm entertaining all of these at once, and that creates a panic. And what's going to happen? I'm going to get killed. When I can control my thinking, my response, and this takes will, but it also takes remembering what I learned. I got to go through all memories that I have, and I got to find the one. Now, what do you do in the presence of a bear? You lay down in a fetal position. Close your eyes, breathe as shallow as you can breathe. So I've gone through that training. I have that memory. Now I've got to bring that memory forward. I've got to review, reflect, and now the more I have learned that, and what I mean by that is the more I have reinforced that training, the more it will become more natural to me. It will become very easy for me to do. But remember, I'm close to a panic. So I've got to be very, very careful of using the adrenaline in a very, very positive way. So my focus becomes laser-like. When that happens with people, when they are under anxiety or stress, there's two ways that people respond to it. One is to deny the stressor. If I deny the bear is there, then I'm not going to get upset. If I can convince myself that it's an illusion, all of those kinds of things, then my anxiety level will be less, etc. Understand the number one way that Americans deal with anxiety is to deny it. Number one way to deal with challenges, etc., is deny it, diminish it. It's not that big a deal. It's not going to this. It's not going to that. And that's kind of a form of fantasy. And a lot of people practice that. In fact, years ago, in the 60s and 70s, there were a lot of 60s and 70s were the height of kind of horror movies, and the kind of slasher movies, all of those gore movies and all of that. And I remember the advertisements for them. Some of them were just ridiculous. I remember there was one advertisement for a movie, and it's so scary and all of that, that they would splash on the previews, if anyone dies while at this theater, you'll get $2,000 cash, which raises the issue, what good's $2,000 going to do me if I'm dead? But it's just the idea of how to kind of hawk this movie and all of that is, um, if you get so frightened that you die, I guess your beneficiaries will get $2,000. Seen them where they had nurses outside, they've had a doctor there, and it's all the hype. But there was one, or actually several movies that use this same idea is while you're in the midst of the movie, if you get very, very frightened, just repeat, it's only a movie. It's only a movie. It's only a movie. And see, what they're doing is teaching you to deny that what you're seeing is real. Just remind yourself it's a movie, it's a fantasy, et cetera, et cetera. Now, it's part of the hype. But it's that same concept is if I can convince myself that this is not real, it's not happening to me, and understand when I'm in this state of shock, that tends to be the response is this can't be real. This is not happening to me. It's a form of denial. And so in America, we do that a lot. But the problem is that it doesn't work. If there's a 10-foot brown bear and I deny it, I'm probably going to end up dead. Now I feel better. And there's a lot of even therapies and all that are oriented toward just put this in a different place. And guys, honestly, there are some people who've used God as therapy, and that is, well, put it on God. And it becomes a platitude. All right, I prayed about it, I put it on God, but I still got it. Or I felt better for a while, and it's like the power of positive thinking. It's like primal scream. It's like I can listen to soothing music and all of those things, and for a while I can begin to feel better, but then the issue comes back. There's still a brown bear there. What do I do? What I want you to understand, and God uses the power of anxiety or the response that anxiety produces. He uses that power in a very positive way. Philippians chapter 4, verse 4, rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I say rejoice. Let your forbearing spirit be known to all men. The Lord is near. Be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all comprehension, shall guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. This is where, especially like pop psychology ends. It's, give it away, put it in a different place, put it in your subconscious, all of those kinds of things. It's not get rid of it or deal with it. It is deny it. Now, this is not teaching denial, but what it's saying is, and this challenge, you pray about something, but the anxiety comes back. You quote unquote gave it to the Lord, but you still have this issue. And it's difficult for you to distance from the issue because you don't see the Lord having dealt with it. You don't see that in your time. So you put it on you put it on him and you felt better. But then the issue starts coming back. The fear starts coming back, the calamity, the panic, all of those kinds of things. That's why Scripture doesn't stop there. Finally, brethren, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is of good repute, if there's anything excellent, anything worthy of praise, let your mind dwell on these things. The things you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, practice these things, and the God of peace shall be with you. It's not just put this on the Lord, which can be a form of denial. Honestly, the way many people do it is, I'm going to deny it. I've given this to God, so I'm going to deny that this is an issue anymore. But he tells us what to do. And it's not to deny it, it's to displace it. When I'm under stress or anxiety, my attention span becomes focused. God says, good, use that. There's power in that. If I can become just laser focused in the presence of the bear with what I need to do, it's going to save my life. If I don't panic, if I don't give in to fear, if I'm not trying to do 20 things at once, and I focus on one thing. All right, let me remember. Because you'll notice he says, let your mind dwell on these things, the things you have learned, received, heard, and seen. This is a lot of reinforcement. This is why we used to do memory work, because you've heard that repetition is the mother of learning. I've got to do it over and over and over again. But remember, as Greeks, we don't like doing that. We don't like hearing something again. But that's the only way it becomes second nature. That's the only way it can move from your secondary memory up into your RAM very quickly, is you've got to have a strong path to it. And the way our neurological paths are, the more we visit a certain part of our brain, the larger that highway becomes and the easier it is to draw that into memory. That's why if you keep saying a person's name, you build a broader highway to that information. If you don't, that highway will shrink up. So that's the repetition. That's doing it over and over and over again. And so he says, do that. And guys, this is where it's so important that, especially given 24/7 news, bad news everywhere we turn, which creates calamity, which creates a potential for panic. And do you see people panicking around you? Do you hear people with no peace whatsoever? How do you find peace in the midst of that? What you do is you displace that information with what's already known, seen, heard, etc. In times that we're living in, guys, we are going to have to repeat to ourselves and to one another the promises that God has given us more than any time that we probably have in our past. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start you with some, but I want you and your family, you and your partner, you and whoever you're with, I want you to start sharing immediately after this video, start sharing mantras, if you will, of promises that God has given us, of things like, he'll never leave or abandon us, that God is all powerful, that there is nothing that God cannot do, that he cares for us, that he is our rock and our fortress. I want you to think back to scriptures, and if you don't have them in memory, I want you to start putting them into memory. I want you to write yourself little sticky notes placed all over the house. I want you to write it on your chalkboard where you put your things I need to buy list by the refrigerator. I want you to put them on the mirror where you make your face or shave in the morning. I want you to surround yourself with the messages that will displace whatever's good, whatever's beautiful, whatever's pure, whatever's honorable. And all of those are going to point back to one source, and that's God. We use this laser focus when we become anxious. Use that laser focus in a positive way. All right. Now, one of the hardest things to do, guys, is when we're in the midst of a pandemic, we want to hear what's going on. How many died today, etc. And what does that feed? What that feeds is our anxiety, our desire to panic, our desire to run out and buy all the toilet paper we can find, etc. Panic. What's the alternative? It's not denial. It's displacement. Replace it with things that, and the promise is you do that, you're going to find peace. I can find peace in the midst of calamity by using the God-given response to anxiety or stress-producing situations by becoming very laser-focused. Don't worry about anything else. I just worry about what's in front of me. But I have to displace that consciously. Now, what do I know to do? I know that God is my deliverer. I know God is there with me. I know God's going to take care of me. God's going to provide. I know that God causes all things to work together for good. So let me look for the good. You're going to have to continually remind yourself of those things. And I want to challenge you with this. You try it this evening, try it tomorrow, try it the next day, and watch to see how your feelings change, how your anxiety and fear go away and dissipate. If you will repeat these things, and everywhere you turn, put them on your desk, Put them by your bed. Put them on your nightstand. Put notes on the refrigerator of promises. Now, I want you, in the next few minutes, I want you to reestablish what those promises are. If you can't, I want you to go to Scripture, and I want you to start memorizing those Scriptures that speak to you about how God takes care of you, etc. The ones that speak to your heart, I want you to start memorizing those so that you can repeat them to yourself. As you're driving, I want you to repeat them to yourself. That's why David said, "Thy word I've hidden in my heart." I don't have to depend on the Torah being read in the temple. I've got it here. I've got it in my memory, and I can recall it when I need it. And I can focus my attention. I can displace the fear, stay away from panic, and find peace. Now, I'm suspect that most of the things that you're hearing right now are not peaceful at all. They're anxious, they're panic. And that has to do with who people turn to get their promises. Is it the CDC? Is it the World Health Organization? Is it the president? Where are people turning to get their promises, their sense of security? How well is that working for them? Because those folks are just as confused as we are. But the folks who displace the fear, and the fear producing anxiety with promises from God, those are the people who can watch the panic with almost a sense of distraction, almost with a sense of watching it from the bleachers. Because here I sit in peace, watching sheep without a shepherd and hurting for them because they have such great anxiety. And my mind is focused totally on what brings me peace. And what is it that brings me peace? The peace of God, the God of peace. How do I get those things? Focusing, narrowing my focus on whatsoever is good, honorable, perfect, worthwhile. Think on these things and find peace. God bless you. Spend some time with the lesson. Again, you've got more questions on the back page than you'll have time to deal with. Pick the ones that look good to you, but please come up with at least 20, 30 promises that you can take to heart right now in the midst of panic and start finding and rebuilding and reestablishing peace. God bless you in your discussion. God bless you and your family. Miss you very much. Look forward to being together soon. Bye-bye.